afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by welcoming each and every one of you here today, whether you are joining us in this room or watching from afar. Thank you for standing with us, because what we are doing here really matters. Weaponization Watch was not created out of convenience, it was born out of necessity. Over the past several years, we have witnessed something deeply troubling in this country. The justice system, which is supposed to be blind, fair, and rooted in truth. It has been used as a tool, a tool to target, a tool to silence, and in many cases, a tool to destroy lives. We created Weaponization Watch to shine a light on that reality. Not through headlines, not through talking points, but through real stories, real cases, and real people. Today's panel, or panels I should say, brings together legal experts, advocates, and individuals who have lived through these experiences firsthand. What you will hear today is not theory, it is reality. We're going to talk about the mechanics of weaponization. We're going to talk about how it plays out in courtrooms. We're going to talk about the collateral damage, the families, the children, the lives that are forever changed. Because behind every case file is a human being. And behind every human being is a family. And that is where the true cost of weaponization is felt the most. We are not here for outrage alone. We are here for truth. We are here for accountability. And we are here to make sure that what has happened to so many Americans is never allowed to happen again. Thank you for being part of this mission. So I would like to introduce our first panel, and we're going to call this panel the Collateral Damage of Weaponization. And so I would like to introduce our panelists here. We have Dr. Ron, we have Chris, we have Nicole, we have Anjali, and we have Reagan. All victims of collateral damage stemming from weaponization of government. And so we're going to get started, and I'm going to ask just a couple questions because I like to hear the stories. And so why don't we start out with you, Reagan, and touch on the personal experience and impact of weaponization to you and your family?
Well, my husband was indicted in 2018. His criminal investigation actually began in 2015 under the Obama administration. My husband's worked at Netflix. He was the VP of IT operations. And after he left Netflix, he was threatened by Netflix leadership, taking bribes and kickbacks. And really all he was doing is working with startup companies to take Netflix to the cloud, which was very revolutionary. But after he left, he was accused of not sufficiently disclosing his relationship. And Netflix filed a civil suit. He fought that for about a year. Once that civil suit was settled, just 3 weeks later, 14 FBI agents raided my home, and my 7 and 4-year-old sons were present. 2.5 years later, he was indicted for honest citizens fraud. 3 years later, we went to trial. 3 years after that, we appealed and lost, and we took our case to the Supreme Court just this past fall, and our petition was denied. The impact is just, it's really hard to describe. There's no area of your life where it doesn't touch your finances, your career, psychologically. You think about it 24/7, and it's just like a cloud hanging over you. So I don't know what else to say. It's a nightmare that doesn't end.
Yeah. Anjali, how has this personally affected you and your family?
Well, you never know it, but 10 years ago, I had a chronic illness from mercury poisoning that almost killed me. Mm-hmm. And I was, tired. I was too weak to drive a car. I couldn't really concentrate, couldn't hold a job. And my very dear friend, Nicole, in the practice of OM, saved my life. Mm-hmm. And she has been since, her and my very dear friend, Rachel, have been since convicted of the first ever in the U.S. forced labor conspiracy only charge. My business was decimated. We were debanked 75 times, including some of my coworkers' family who have literally nothing to do with us. And I'm here because she and Rachel and this work saved my life, and I have to save theirs. They're now going to sentencing on Monday. The government is seeking 20 years, the absolute max, which is what you would see only in violent crimes and murder.
Yeah. It's a really outrageous case. You've been following it for many months now.
You have?
And I know. And next to me is Nicole. And Nicole had her weaponization a few years back and kept quiet out of fear, because that's what the government does. They fear fearmonger. And we recently connected with Nicole's husband, who's already been through this unfortunate weaponization that we've been seeing in this country. And we asked Nicole if she would come and, talk for the first time about the impact to her and her children and her family. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. We've been going, this is 15 years we've been going through this. It started with police raiding our home when my son was 6 months old in the dead of the morning. And they followed me around the house like I was a criminal and demanded to go into my 6-month-old room with guns. And I remember pleading with them not to do that because he was 6 months old and I was fearful. He was ripped from our home. I didn't know what to do. I had my 6-month-old in my hands. He was crying. And Dennis my husband was yelling, in my wallet, there's a card for a lawyer, call that person. And then from there, we had to figure what to do. And, the U.S. attorney that arrested him made him out to be a criminal. Like they dehumanized him. And in the courtroom, when I was sitting there, the U.S. attorney said that, he shouldn't even be going home to my son because he was a danger to my son. And I remember sitting in the courtroom so angry. Like, how does she know that? She doesn't know that. How can she say that? And she also said that he was a danger to going back to the home that we lived in. And we were evicted from our home. We had to uproot and leave our home. And we slept in a small bedroom at my parents' house on a mattress. And my son was 6 months old, pack and play. Having to go back and forth and figuring out life. And as Reagan kind of mentioned, the justice system is not fast. And we had to decide, do we put our lives on hold or do we have another baby? And we decided to have another baby, not knowing what the future would hold. And I was 9 months pregnant going through trial. The trial seemed great. We felt very optimistic. And I was 2 days postpartum holding my daughter in my hands. And the verdict came back. And I remember my father calling me saying, he's coming home. And I said, what does that mean? He's coming home. He's coming home. He's coming to you right now. And I said, okay, but what does that mean? And I'm going to get emotional.
So you didn't know at that moment that he had been found guilty?
That he had been found guilty.
Okay.
And my father said that he was guilty. And I remember sitting with my newborn daughter in my arms, and I just broke down crying where one of my friends had to take our daughter. And I had a C-section. I'm just recovering from major surgery, and I begged my OB to go home early so that I can figure out life with him. And we had to figure out what to do from there.
You were still in the hospital?
I was in the hospital.
Wow.
Yep. And it's just, well, we were in fight mode at that point. He did everything that he could to set us up. I was working part-time. I had to increase my hours because he was a police officer. They didn't want to put him too close to where we lived, so they placed him in Michigan, which was a 12-hour drive from. And we made the decision that I would take the kids twice a month to to see him because they were so little. I didn't want them to not have a relationship with him. So my mother-in-law actually moved her RV to Michigan because of the financial stress it was driving
Wow.
and staying in hotel rooms. And I had to work crazy hours in order to be able to get long weekends off. Just the things that you do, and, you know, to keep your family whole in that moment as much as you can.
That's right.
And, you know, because they were so little, there were things that, you know, he did. You know, he recorded himself reading over 100 children's books. And every night we would watch those recordings with my 2 children so that my baby could hear his voice every day and wouldn't be considered a stranger to him.
Right.
Only seeing him once a month.
When we were going through the January 6th, you know, trials and all those men and women that were incarcerated, sitting, languishing for years in pretrial. I remember one time I was on the phone with my nephew, and he, you know, he's not married, didn't have children at the time, you know, and so we didn't need to talk all the time. And, you know, so one day I was like, you know, I haven't heard from you. And he's like, you know, these men have to talk to their children. They have to talk to their wives. And he shared a story with me that one of the men that he was incarcerated with was on the phone with, you know, his sons, and the little boys said they couldn't remember what their dad's face looked like. So it's very important. And, you know, thank you very much for sharing that. It's people need to know that. They don't realize, you know, the impact to the family. You know, I call it a humanitarian crisis, and I call it a collateral damage, especially when it's because of weaponization.
Yep.
You know, and so thank you for sharing. And we're going to talk more with you later on, because most of the people here have really, you know, been speaking out about their families and their cases, and you haven't had that opportunity yet. So we want to hear more from you. And so thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Chris. Yeah, we've been talking, and I know a lot of what's been going on with you. And so, you know, please share, you know, what the personal impact has been to you and your family.
Yeah. So prior to COVID, my wife and I for small business owners, had successful business. And my schooling, I went to American Film Institute, made a movie a long time ago, and I wanted to get back into that world. And we had developed this TV series called Ohana about government corruption and organized crime in Hawaii in the 1990s. And it was a fictional character based on actual events that happened. We had our funding in place. We had everything going. Then COVID hit, and that all fell apart. Like a lot of people during COVID, it was chaos. I mean, we were like solving our Instacart orders. Like, it was just a weird time. When the PPP loan was introduced, I'm a researcher. I do talk to a lot of people, like banks and different areas, and said, hey, we don't have historical payroll, but we do have a budget that was set up. And I've had SBA loans in the past where when the loan originator told us you can use your projections, and it was in an email, I took it as, okay, well, I've gotten SBA loans in the past, and they ask for projections. They want to know how your business is going to succeed in 12 months,
Right.
or 24 months. So we followed the guidelines of the loan originator. Everything got funded. We used the funds to shoot a trailer to attract talent. And we went over to Hawaii. This was a Hawaii project, even though we live in California. Went to Hawaii. All the crew members that we hired were thankful because they were out of work. They've been out of work for almost 7-8 months. So they were very appreciative. Everything we thought was going fine. We were going to go back over in the summer of 2021 to shoot the pilot. And then May of 2021 hit, and we got our target letter, and they seized everything. They actually put a Liz pendant on our house that we bought in 2017 that had over $1 million in equity. We couldn't touch any of our money to have a defense. We were actually not indicted until a year after that, and even in the DOJ's own handbook, they're supposed to either charge you or give you the seized money back in 90 days. They didn't do that. My wife Erin and I were both charged. We're both fighters. We fought as hard as we could. We had every attorney that the court gave us. We would say, hey, they did this wrong, they did that wrong, and every attorney from Hawaii is on a panel, and they're all personal injury attorneys by trade. So I tell people it's like going in for open heart surgery and they gave me a dentist.
Good analogy.
And they would all ask to be removed every time we asked them to push on this or that and the other. This went by for years, and finally they basically forced us into a plea. They said they were going to charge my mom, who had 78 now, charge her if we didn't plea. And their ridiculous plea agreement where we weren't even allowed to ask for a lower sentence. The prosecutor said if you even bring up anything about the email saying that to use projections, he would charge more charges against us and charge my mom.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't even know how you call it, weaponization.
That is what it is. That's lawfare.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. They threaten you with all kinds of things, and, because they know in most cases it'll break you. And you'll hear more about that from, our legal experts later, but that's why they say the federal, success rate for prosecutors is, up in the 90 percentile, because people really break because they're so fearful and scared, I saw that a lot in the January 6th cases, but I also saw a lot of people that said, I know my own family he said, I'll stay in this jail for 20 years if I have to. I'm never going to admit to something I didn't do wrong. But it's very hard. It was easy for him because he didn't have collateral damage out here. He was the collateral damage, So for some people, it's just not that easy. But we saw it a lot. And I'm real sorry. And, we'll talk more later also. But one thing that I wanted to ask you that I recall in one of our conversations was your wife has already been in prison.
Yes. So the judge gave us staggered sentences. So my wife actually went in January 23rd of 2025. So last
Okay.
January. And I've been basically a pseudo single dad.
Yeah.
Running a business. We have a new business that we started during this whole mess that's actually very successful again, which thank God on that. And then I have 2 great sons, but the effect that has had on them is
It's unforgivable, and it will never leave them. They've been separated from their mother for, more than a year of their life. And again, I saw that in January 6th. We have a mother in Pennsylvania. She's a mother of 8 children. I sat in the front row with 7 of her 8 children when she got sentenced. And this heartless judge, he's one of the worst judges we have here. And I'm saying his name, Judge Lambert. He didn't care. He didn't care that she was on house arrest for 3 years. He didn't care that she couldn't leave the house. He didn't care. He just said, I have a job to do. And he sentenced her for an additional 5 years. So, and those kids were separated. I mean, her youngest child was 7. It was a little girl. And, it was really, really brutal. And so I met your sons, and, you've done a wonderful job in your wife's absence. But now your weaponization isn't done yet.
Yeah. And just to speak on that too, these prosecutors and these judges don't care about the collective.
No.
And it baffles me. Why not? But yeah, and my wife, actually, when we leave DC, we're able to go pick her up and take her home. And then I am supposed to go in and serve even longer than her at the end of this year sometime. I don't have a date yet because we're having that hearing. So
Chris, I'm so sorry.
it's one of those things and I think even the lawyers say this, well, it's not a bad sentence, it's a short sentence, but you don't understand.
It's a sentence.
It's a sentence,
Yeah.
and it's longer than you think because it's both of us. So our kids have us separated. They don't have the whole dynamic of the family, especially you saw I have a 14-year-old. He's going to be learning how to drive next year. I won't be able to do that to teach.
Yeah, and it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal, and I wish I could wave a magic wand for you, but
Yeah.
we're working on it.
That's
you know, we're that's why we all come together and we tell these stories, because the public needs to know, and the president needs to know, and the DOJ needs to know, and you know, people need to know so they can rally behind us and you know, pledge their support. And so thank you very much. Dr. Ron, you've been with us now a few times, and you know, you've told your story a few times with us, and you know, why don't you give us an update? And also, because I'm going to ask another question of all of you, but I'd like to, you know, start off with you. Give us a, you know, quick update, and tell me what the you know, the financial and the social impact has been to you and your wife and your children.
Yeah. So, just a brief background a little bit. So I'm an emergency room doctor, and during COVID, I was very active. I ran probably the largest testing center and certainly the largest monoclonal antibody treatment center in the state of Maryland. And I was very public and outspoken about how wonderful the monoclonal antibodies were, because they were the cure for COVID. And I publicly started to question the Biden administration's politicization of the particular medication, and then eventually they're halting the entire program. And I believe I'm actually a whistleblower in that regard, because that put the emergency use authorization of the vaccines in direct crosshairs, because I didn't know this, but there's a federal law that they can't exist. You can't have an emergency use authorization for a vaccine if there's a treatment that works, which is why hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were so pushed down. So I went public and I spoke out. And 4 months later, completely out of the blue, I find myself the victim of weaponization. I was indicted on healthcare fraud charges for patients I hadn't even seen. They were seen in my clinic, but I didn't see them. And even the federal judge overseeing the case commented that this looks like a case of, quote, shoot first and ask questions later. So long story short, I went to trial because I didn't do anything wrong. And the federal judge acted in a 93-page opinion saying that I was innocent, I didn't do anything wrong, there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. And worst experience of my life going through trial. I have 4 children. I have a wife who's a physician. She's a pediatric oncologist at a major academic center here in Maryland. And so she treats kids with cancer. So she has a really hard job too. And all 4 of my children were, with the exception of the 3-year-old at the time, all very well adjusted, good kids, straight A students. They all need to go into therapy. My middle daughter, she wouldn't leave my bed for an entire year. I didn't sleep at all. I'd stare at the ceiling, but she'd lie next to me because she wouldn't leave the bed. So right before they're leaving office, the DOJ decides to appeal. So now I'm going through this yet again this coming August. So this horror story, I will have to relive this again in August unless we can do something about it and get somebody in the Trump administration to look at this objectively and say, this is a crazy case. It's not a good use of taxpayer dollars. So that's kind of where I am right now. And that's kind of the update. But it just, I lost my business. I couldn't work for 2 years, and then getting back into work. Thankfully, I never lost my medical license, but getting back into work was nearly impossible. Hospitals didn't want to credential me. And then medical malpractice insurance company said, well, you haven't worked in 2 years. We don't want to insure you. So almost impossible to get back to work. And I think my job's a pretty important job. Like it helps society. So
That's right.
My wife's job helps society.
Right.
And, it's just crazy to me that you can take people like that out of society that did nothing wrong. And the impact on the family, like everybody else has said, I always put like a badness scale. The top of the badness scale would be loss of a loved one. Just below that is this. Like you can't explain it to anyone who hasn't gone through it. Just below that, just below loss of a loved one is going through something like this. You just can't separate it to words. It's horrific.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you, for the update. And, we've been working together for many months now. And so I'm very familiar with your story. And so, before we wrap up this, this first panel, if you could quickly, touch on what the financial impact has been, if you can, kind of hit on that for a quick minute or tip.
Well, financially, lawyers, they're not cheap, right? So if you want to take a case to trial, you're looking at 2 years of paying lawyers. And like I said, they don't come cheap. So there's the cost of going to trial, And of course, you're almost unemployable when you're going under an indictment. I mean,
Yeah.
you're a Google search away, right?
Yeah.
So you won't be able to hold down a job, and you're paying lawyers, and so it hits you from both ends: your actual income, your potential income. And we had to sell investments, 401ks. They came after our house. There's no area of your life that doesn't touch.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The way you put it, you're right about that. All the J6ers, you know, they're probably the majority, you know, they're bankrupt. Can't find jobs now. You know, marriage is dissolved, no health care, you know, lifetime income. So
Yeah, we can't get help. We have to get state covered health care because he can't get a job through a company. So, right. So,
that's a whole nother topic, you know, that's a whole nother topic. Anjali, I know how financially strapped this is made, you know, Cole and Rachel and everything that you and your team have done and, you know, your family to help your family, you know, but what has it done to you?
I mean, these cases and true, I've met so many other people who have the same story, but the aim of the government is to destroy our business. That's what they're going for. I mean, they investigated my company for 5 years and found absolutely nothing. And we spent, even in that time, tons of millions.
And got debanked?
And we were debanked over 70 times, including family. My family's mortgaged their house multiple times in order to try to support. Nicole's facing $12 million in forfeiture as a part of the sentencing. So the aim is to try to squash you until you do not exist, and the game is to not allow that to happen. But there's not a single person in either my organization, in my community, in my family, and their family that it hasn't touched.
Yeah. It's brutal. I know, I've seen it up close and personal, you know. I wish, you know, I wish Monday was going to be a success for us and not for the prosecution, right? We'll see what it brings for aiming for. Yes. Nicole, back to you.
So Dennis was the main source of income. You know, I'm a nurse, but our goal was that he would work full time and I would work part time. So when he lost his job, I had to increase, my hours in order to maintain the income and just be able to, pay for the kids and everything else. One of the things he did is he cashed in, one of his retirement funds and paid a mortgage up on the house. So in case something happened or the roof leaked or whatever, I didn't have to struggle every month with being a single mom with 2 small kids. And one of the things that I did, during that time is I got advanced degrees. So during that time period, I got my master's degree so that I could excel in my organization and get more of a higher paying job with the ability not to have to worry about, I know it's in healthcare, you worry about holidays. And I was afraid more than anything for my children to be alone on a holiday without either of us because, I had to work at Christmas so I did everything that I could in order to be able to do better at my job so that I can get those, more of a flexible job. That all takes, and half of this stuff that I'm saying today, I've never actually said out loud to anyone outside of my husband or your family, my immediate people that were my people.
Yeah.
During that time. But, it did hit us hard. It was not easy to know that, I was one bad event happening, away from, not being able to put food on the table.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a lot. They don't realize that they take that piece away from you where they took him away, but then I had to figure out how to be everything else. And
Yeah. That's why we call it, collateral damage and, the cost of weaponization. It's terrible. And, Chris, I pretty much know. I mean, you kind of incorporate it into your talking points, but, thank God for you, you've been able to recoup now, but you went through a lot to get there.
Yeah, and that was not easy. And I think everybody here probably knows about how the government abuses the word civil forfeiture.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what they seized everything, even retirement accounts, even if they weren't tied to the PPP loan. And like I said, we had $1 million in equity in our house that we bought in 2017, and we were putting more money into that prior to COVID. And the AUSA had that Liz pendants on there up until the week before our sentencing, and then said, you know what, the government doesn't have an interest in this property anymore. We're going to let the bank foreclose on it instead. And my wife, literally, it's in the transcript, asked the judge, well, what about our house? And he said, I don't care about your house. Okay. And then we go to find out my best friend, he's a wealthy mortgage broker. He's like, you have all this equity. I have money out. I'll send a guy to the foreclosure sale to purchase the property.
Wow.
Because he saw what we were going through.
Wow.
And he has his buyer go out to the auction that was scheduled 10 days after our sentencing hearing, 4 days before Aaron's supposed to go in. And he's like, you know what? The bank ended up buying it back because he only had like $1 million in cash to do it, and it sold for like 1.2. But the buyer, and I have this all in a text. He's like, it was weird though, because the buyer that I sent out there has been buying foreclosed homes for 30 years. There was federal agents at the auction bidding on your property. And they bid up to about 1.1 million is what he told me. And I'm like, well, that's how much we paid back on between everything seized and what we actually paid back on the original loan for the PPP. We paid back on this 90%
Rent.
And he's like, that he's never seen that before. And everyone I talked to is like, that doesn't sound normal. Okay. And then sorry, I can talk. I can drag this out for long.
Yeah.
But the only other financial issue that happened, like I said, we paid back. I mean, it was a $1.3 million loan. 1.1 was paid back between seizures and what we physically paid.
Yeah.
The judge even recognized that at our sentencing. It said, you guys have made great effort towards restitution. And he gave an example at another hearing that how everything paid back should go against what you owe in restitution. Yet, I think it was 2 weeks after Aaron got locked up, I get a bill in the mail from the DOJ in Hawaii for $1.3 million for the entire amount. So they don't want to destroy you. They want to obliterate.
Yeah, that's what we watched, that's what we watched with January 6th. And, with January 6th, the price that some of these people paid, I don't even know how to put it into words anymore, and I wrote up a few little notes that I just want to touch on the January 6th families, and then we're gonna move on to the next panel, but it's just a little update. January 6th defendants and their families, they endured massive consequences, and I don't negate anybody that's gone through weaponization. Everybody here at this table has paid a very high price. But the January 6th stuff was so political, so political, and these people were used as bait to go after a president, and it's just sick. It's really sick, and their consequences, extend, beyond the courtroom, like you hear, and these January 6ers, they can't get employed, they can't get a job, they have they've gone and they've applied back into like the career that they were in before this whole thing happened, and they can't. My nephew was a 12-year Army reservist, gave his life to his country for 12 years, and just like that they said too bad, and they kicked him out, took his health benefits, took his his pension, took everything, and that happens to a lot of the people from January 6th. And so they lost life savings, healthcare. They, several marriages that did not survive January 6th. You know, the children were subjected to really traumatic early morning raids, flashbangs being thrown through windows and thrown through doors. And, you know, we will never be able to fix what was done to you guys, to your family members, you know, or the January 6ers. But what we can do is have these conversations to try to bring attention to hopefully not let this happen in the future. But, you know, we're very, I just have to put this message out here, you know, we're very grateful for the pardons, you know, but it was only the first step, in my opinion. It can't be the final one. And there has to be accountability for what was done. And there has to be meaningful restitution to these people, you know, the Sixers and to you here at this table. Americans deserve the opportunity to rebuild their lives after they have been victims of weaponization, and they deserve to be made whole again. President Trump, you know, spoke about that at his rallies, and he said it very publicly that the J6ers needed to be made whole. And, you know, today, most of these January 6ers, you know, they've been pardoned for, you know, just over a year. And, you know, they're struggling to find work to regain stability in their lives. And, you know, a big thing for me is the media spoke very loudly about the persecution of these people. And that same media is very silent now and doesn't say a word about these people. Some of them built their platforms, their podcasts, their social medias, whatever, talking about January 6th. Recently, you know, a lot of the news shows, they were talking about January 6th, but nobody wants to talk to the January 6ers and find out how they're coping today. And it's really very frustrating because I'm still in contact with most of these people. And I could tell you the struggle is far from over, you know, and then I won't let these families be forgotten. I won't let people that I've come in contact with who have been victims of weaponization be forgotten. I won't. And restitution needs to be talked about in this DOJ. It must be spoken about in this DOJ, not just for January 6ers, but people whose Dr. Ron, the East Haven Fort. It really boils my blood, and we have to have a conversation on looking at one of my favorite people right now. Well, two of my favorite people right now. And you're going to hear from them. And one of them that I'm staring at knows very well financial ruin, and the need for restitution. And we're gonna keep publicly talking about it, and it needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. Restitution for victims of weaponization, restitution for the J6ers, and it needs to be now. And with that,
Can I just say something?
yes, sir.
Sorry. I think the audience should care about this, aside from the fact that all these people, myself included, have been victims of this. But if they can do this to the president of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, they can do this to anybody. And why wouldn't they do it to anybody?
That's right.
So everybody should care about this, because you could be next.
That's right.
So everybody needs to take an interest in this, and everybody needs to put an end to this, because this is horrible, and it destroys lives, and it's not fair. It's not right. It's the most un-American thing imaginable.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot about weaponization. We have somebody very, very, very special that's going to be talking about the weaponization that he endured, and it's sick. It's really sick. And we're going to work, all of the people here and the other people that are going to come to these panels. We are on to something, Anjali, and we are really exposing how deep weaponization runs. And we need to hear from more Nicoles, who have sat on the sidelines silent for years and years and years and never came out and talked. That's how far back weaponization goes. Years and years. And we're gonna shine a light on that. So please, we hope you stick around, and we hope you listen to the other panels, and thank you for joining us. And that's a wrap.
Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the Weaponization Watch event that we're having today. And I'm retired Colonel Rob Maness. I'm a member of the team that works with the organization. I just want to remind everybody that you can go to help us by donating at weaponizationwatch.com. And you can follow us at Weaponization Watch on X. We are very appreciative of your help And everybody that's involved in this organization is focused on one thing, and that is justice for the individuals that have been harmed by the weaponization of government, the weaponization of the legal system, the weaponization of the media, and even the weaponization of the bureaucracy in organizations like the Department of War. All of the people you're going to hear from today are either attorneys or are victims of these weaponization factors that are going on in American society today. So welcome once again. This panel is going to talk about the Eastern District of New York and the concerns that we have with that, and we're going to talk about some cases that are very, very appropriate for this discussion. And with me is Jeff Clark from the Oversight Project, VP of Litigation, Mr. John Lauro, who was President Trump's attorney in the J6 cases and is leading the One Taste case, and Officer Dennis Spalding, who is involved in the East Haven, Connecticut case that we're going to discuss today. And I guess I would like to ask each of you, starting with John, what is it about the EDNY district that is causing so much difficulty for American citizens?
Well, in terms of full disclosure, I was a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of New York many years ago, and I've been a defense lawyer now for 35 years. I think there's been a pervasive problem under the Obama and Biden administrations in the Eastern District, and it generally revolves around three issues. One, there's been an abuse of power among prosecutors. There's been taking statutes and turning them into something that they were never intended to in order to reach a criminalized result. There have been abuses by federal prosecutors in terms of discovery, in terms of providing exculpatory information in a very significant way. And finally, and most significantly, there's been this sense in the Eastern District that once a prosecutor has a narrative, they're going to stick to that narrative no matter what. And any evidence that you bring that is contrary to what the government thinks they need to tell a jury loses out. And as a result, justice is not being done. There's one case that was very telling. It involved Douglas McKay, who was, he forwarded a meme that suggested that you could vote by texting as opposed to going to a voting booth. It was ridiculous. It was a silly, just throwaway meme, but it was directed against Hillary Clinton. And as soon as Joe Biden became president, they prosecuted him for violation of civil rights in the Eastern District of New York, claiming that people were somehow losing their right to vote. And that was just one example. There's others. But I think there's a problem, a pervasive problem in EDNY, and hopefully the new administration will deal with it.
Yeah, I hope so. Dennis, what have you seen that raised concerns in your interactions with EDNY? You're more on the end of the stick of someone that's been prosecuted, and you're a police officer who essentially, I think, is being prosecuted because of the great job that several officers were doing in East Haven, Connecticut. What are your concerns about the EDNY itself and their processes that you've seen?
So I think it would be best to just share my story, and then you can connect the dots to how they weaponized and used it against us. So not a lot of people are aware of my story and how the Obama Justice Department weaponized the DOJ against myself, fellow police officers, my police department, and the town that I served. I was a police officer in the town of East Haven, Connecticut for approximately 9 years. I was a very active and decorated police officer with a spotless disciplinary record. I served with 3 other decorated police officers who were also charged in this case. The 4 of us were amongst the town's most decorated and proactive police officers, receiving numerous awards, medals of valor, medals of honor, unit citations, commendation medals, and a Purple Heart in that time. Officer David Carey, Sergeant John Miller, and Officer Jason Zullo were members of the department's SWAT team. Officer Carey was a member of the Canine Division. I was a member of the Search, Rescue, and Recovery Dive Team. Officer David Carey was shot in the line of duty, attempting to arrest an armed robbery suspect and take them into custody, receiving the police department's first ever Purple Heart. Sergeant John Miller twice had used deadly force to protect innocent citizens and save the lives of 2 police officers who were shot attempting to arrest an armed robbery suspect. None of that mattered to the Obama DOJ, who portrayed us as rogue officers, bullies with badges, and a cancerous cadre. Our case is very involved, and it would take a book to outline everything that happened to our town and police department, many of which I spoke about in the recently recorded hour-long podcast with the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, who has taken on our efforts to pursue a presidential pardon from Donald J. Trump. Our story starts around 2008 when I discovered a major fraud occurring within East Haven, as well as in the sanctuary city of New Haven, Connecticut. The illegal immigrant population was using forged documents to obtain vehicle registrations from Pennsylvania and other states, as well as obtaining fake insurance cards and fake driver's licenses. One of my investigations led to approximately 1,500 license plates being canceled by Pennsylvania Department of Motor Vehicle. This fraud resulted in over $2 million exchanging hands with those involved in this organized crime. Illegal immigrants were paying approximately $1,500 to obtain these license plates and documents. My investigation led to the arrest of 2 women who masterminded this scam and the arrest of thousands of illegal immigrants. This investigation made myself and the East Haven Police Department a target. They were targeted by politicians in Connecticut and activist groups led by Yale University law students who claimed racial profiling, harassment, and targeting of Hispanics by the police department. It was the fraud that was targeted, not the color of someone's skin. After years of these claims being investigated by the police department, the state of Connecticut, the chief state's attorney's office, and even a year-long investigation conducted by the New Haven, Connecticut FBI office, no finding of wrongdoing or criminal charges were ever filed. In fact, many of the claims ended with officers and the department being exonerated. That all changed when the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, led by Tom Perez, later DNC chairman, opened a pattern and practice investigation into the department based off the complaint filed by Yale Law School Clinic. This investigation was led by the New York FBI field office. When the town, the police department, and police union pushed back against this investigation, who claimed officers were engaged in racial profiling, targeting of Hispanic members of the community, the DOJ turned it into a criminal investigation, where any and all police officers in our police department became a target of a DOJ fishing expedition. Police officers in the department now knew that we were going to be targeted and used as pawns to get the town to cave to Tom Perez's demand in a federal consent decree. Tom Perez came into town not to investigate a crime, but to find a crime to charge someone with. 4 officers, including myself, were charged and sentenced for what the DOJ alleges was a 4-year-long criminal conspiracy to violate the civil rights of undocumented immigrants and various members of the East Haven community. An indictment alleging police brutality ended with a conviction for a 2-centimeter cut and a half-speed punch to the chest of a resisting, uncooperative suspect. A case sold to the media as racial profiling of Hispanics ended with 0 evidence of racial profiling and 3 of the 4 officers being convicted of events involving white, non-Hispanic individuals. After the conviction, Tom Perez and the Obama DOJ got what they wanted. We were used as pawns, and the town of East Haven was forced to sign a consent decree, essentially becoming a sanctuary city. The DOJ was weaponized for a political agenda. Make no mistake about it. Had it not been for the arrest of thousands of illegal immigrants driving around town with no license, no insurance, involved with this massive fraud, Tom Perez and the Obama DOJ would have never been in East Haven, and myself and fellow officers never sentenced to federal prison. Thank you for your time and allowing me to tell my story and give our town and police department a voice. What happened in East Haven was not right and needs to be corrected. Weaponizing the DOJ to achieve a political objective is wrong and needs to stop. I look forward to continuing to tell our story and happy to answer any questions.
That certainly meets the definition of selective prosecution. Jeff, you've been exposed to selective prosecution yourself, but now you're the VP of litigation for the Oversight Project. Congratulations, by the way. But from the Eastern District of New York specifically, why does this tend to be happening from this one district? It seems like there's an overwhelming number of cases here.
So, well, thanks for having me. Thanks to the Weaponization Project here for assembling all of us. So I did not work as John did as a prosecutor in a particular U.S. Attorney's Office. I worked at Main Justice going back into the Bush administration, Bush 43, where I spent 4 years. And then I spent 2.5 years in the Trump 45 Main Justice, running 2 of the 7 litigating divisions. And I had experience with the Eastern District of New York, and I had general experience with U.S. attorneys' offices. You know, if I lapse into the competition and the rivalries between Main Justice on the one hand and the U.S. attorneys' offices on the other, John will forgive me. But first, let me mention 2 people in particular, who either were at some point or went to the Eastern District of New York. The first one is Richard Donahue, who was named by the judges as the U.S. attorney there, and then eventually was brought to Main Justice in July of 2020 to head up all of the 2020 election investigations, or in many ways non-investigations, because I don't think that they really investigated very much. As they admitted at a bar trial that I was involved in. And it's strange to have taken someone who was running their own gig as a U.S. attorney in one of the most prominent U.S. attorney's offices in the country, being EDNY. And if one becomes the U.S. attorney of the Eastern District of New York, when you enter private practice later, you have a very lucrative practice in front of you. But to come in and just focus on election matters largely for the last few months and the critical few months in the lead up to the 2020 presidential election, and then in the aftermath of it, is strange. And I can tell you from my personal interactions that Richard Donahue did not think that there was anything wrong with the 2020 election, which to my mind is great evidence of the fact that one has their brain and their nose for wrongdoing turned off. So that's one anecdote from the Eastern District. There's another U.S. attorney, the man who I think succeeded him immediately as the acting U.S. attorney, and that's Seth Ducharme. He worked in the Deputy Attorney General's office at Main Justice in Trump 45. But he went and headed up that office, and he is the man who decided, a short time into when President Biden took over in 2021, to file the ridiculous charges against Doug Mackey for putting together an internet meme suggesting that Democrat voters were dumb enough that they should try to vote via text message or vote via social media. I forget exactly what his meme said, but it was clearly a joke. And to prosecute someone for being engaged in humor, which there's a long tradition in America of political satire and the like, is truly off the charts. Eventually, his case gets to the Second Circuit and it's thrown out. Now Doug Mackey is pursuing restitution for the injustices that were done to him. But, think about this. There is a Trump appointee who was completely willing to play ball with the Biden administration and file totally stupid charges over an internet meme, as if he was a grave threat to the republic, because he was actually a threat to Hillary Clinton's electability by causing her to suffer ridicule, who would do that under President Biden. And then fast forward a little bit, but there was a big FBI leader up in New York City, Charles McGonigal, who was actually engaged in spying activity for Russia. And, like I said about this being an office that leads to very lucrative careers, Seth Ducharme eventually became Charles McGonigal's lawyer. So, this is not, don't believe the hype you read in the mainstream media that anyone who's a Trump appointee is either necessarily super conservative or not. A man who would bring charges against Doug Mackey for an internet meme on social media and who would just be very happy, and I believe in the duty of lawyers to represent anyone who was accused of a crime. But, one of their most prominent cases ever is to represent Charles McGonigal, who's a spy and a traitor to this country. It raises a lot of questions about what's going on. And so I don't want to go on longer than the other, intro remarks, but I'll say something as well at some point, Colonel, about, my diagnoses of kind of things that can get out of control in U.S. attorneys' offices. And I think the Southern District of New York, the Eastern District of New York, and a few other districts have this problem.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I agree with you. And the interesting thing is you both, John, you and Jeff have both mentioned the Mackey case and its First Amendment, and he happens to be a Trump supporter. But there's another case that you're working on, John, the Wantes case, which is also, I believe, about a First Amendment issue, or at least part of it. What is that case about, and where are they going with that? And why are they? It seems like they're attacking a business.
It is. Let me first of all say there's no more courageous lawyer than Jeff Clark, and there's no one who has suffered more for his political beliefs than Jeff Clark. And what the DC bar has done to you is an abomination and a shame. And hopefully one day it'll be rectified. But let me also say, though, something about the Eastern District. It lives in the shadow of the Southern District of New York, which is probably the most prominent U.S. Attorney's Office in the country. And it always tries a little bit harder. And one thing about being a prosecutor is you get points for bringing a big public case. And that translates into material wealth after you leave the U.S. Attorney's Office. And time again, we see prosecutors who resume build. They take cases, they stretch the law, they try to get convictions, they get a lot of press coverage, and then they go into private practice and they put on their resume, hey, look at this great case. I convicted police officers. I convicted political figures. I convicted somebody who tried to upset Hillary Clinton's campaign. And you can monetize that, which is a shame, but that's the reality of what we have. The Wantes case is an example of that, where you have prosecutors who I believe are just off the charts woke, where the folks involved in Wantes have a spiritual practice. It involves a sensuality as well, but it's entirely voluntary. Mm-hmm. And it is one where everybody who joins the practice makes a decision to follow a certain spiritual practice, which is rooted in Hinduism and in Buddhism. Well, it involves sexuality, and the prosecutors clearly don't like it. It's a Biden-era prosecution where the theme is that essentially all sexuality is power-driven, and these women were prosecuted under a Victims Trafficking Act. They were looking at 15 years in jail. There was no forced sexuality. There was no physical violence of any kind. Nobody was held at gunpoint to do anything inappropriate. It was completely voluntary, and everybody who signed up went into it believing that they were going to get some spiritual benefit. Years later, some concluded that they didn't like it. They looked back and said, oh, I was psychologically coerced, and I was I was affected by that psychological coercion, and the government took that to trial, and they were successful. I didn't try the case, but I'm trying to help right now, and that was the government's theory. And that's going on. Unfortunately, under the Trump administration, there's a lot of cases that were in the Biden pipeline that are still around, and it's going to take time for the people in the current administration to catch up with.
Yeah. Are there any similarities between the East Haven police officer's case and this case from a structural perspective?
There is. There's the Chris McPartland case, which was brought in EDNY, where a state prosecutor had evidence of federal corruption. He tried to bring it before the FBI, and guess what happened? The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York went after him on an obstruction of justice charge, very similar to what you experienced. I believe that the prosecutors were acting in a retaliatory way. They also leaked information to the press during the course of the case and really affected how the jury looked at the case. And a lawyer was convicted and sentenced to jail. I think he got something like 5 years he ended up doing.
Wow. Is there for Jeff and John both? I mean, I'd like to get your takes on this. Is there a set of patterns that the average observer should be seeing or can see with these prosecutions? I mean, like the victims in Alente's case and the East Haven police officer's case are totally different, and then again totally different than the Doug Mackey case, who's a strong Trump supporter. But they all seem to have a certain set of patterns that go with them. What do you, from an attorney's perspective that has done this for a long time, what kind of patterns do you see that are standing out to you?
So I think, John has alluded to this. I think, he should describe for you what he thinks the dysfunctionalities are in terms of U.S. attorneys' offices, in particular U.S. attorneys' offices not following the law in terms of the Brady case from the Supreme Court and the Giglio case. Because he had referenced that. I think he can unpack that, best unpack that for you. Let me talk about the case that led to the consent decree against the town in Connecticut, because this is an overarching structural issue, and maybe it might help for me to explain to the viewers, well, what is a consent decree? I'm sure it's probably a term that you've come across in the news, but let me unpack quickly what it is. So a consent decree is like a cross between a private agreement, a contract, and a judicial order. It's a fusion of the two things at the same time. So if there's litigation and the parties agree, they can propose an agreement and then an order that arises out of that agreement, trying to permanentize, to concretize that agreement going into the future. And unlike a contract, if Rob and I sign a contract, I don't know, Rob's going to pay me $1 million to come on his podcast.
That's right.
Let me give you an idea.
Sure.
It's a good idea. Then that's just a private agreement. Now, if Rob breaches it, I may take him to court, right? But it's not the agreement itself isn't in order. But if you're already in litigation and you're in a posture where you can get one of these consent decrees, the agreement between the party can be hardened into an order from the judge. And at that point, if you disobey the order from the judge, you can be held in contempt. And so very serious remedies attached to that, remedies that go beyond contract law remedies. The other thing that it does is it can be very difficult once a consent decree gets put in place to undo it. You have to go back to the court, you have to meet. I'll spare you the name of the case, but I'll just say the name is Rufo. The Rufo case gives you the standards for when you can try to undo a consent decree, but it's not easy. And so why does the Civil Rights Division pursue these consent decrees and try to harden practices against the police? Well, part of it is what I'll call leftist, socialist, communist project of a war on the police, of trying to establish that, you want to defund the police. One way you can war on them is to defund them. Another way you can war on them is to consent decree them, to get their city to sort of hamstring what it is that they can do going into the future. And the other thing it does is it sidesteps Congress, right? You don't have the people's representatives deciding what set of standards will govern a given municipality who's targeted by the Civil Rights Division. Instead, it gets embodied in this consent decree. And then who does the administrator of the consent decree become? It becomes one judge. There have been, consent decrees that go on for way too long after the conduct's been remedied for decades and decades. So you have judges who go from being baby judges or being, middle-aged judges to being, in their 80s and 90s, and they're still administering consent decrees long after the facts have changed. So there's been a long history, especially on the left, of consent decree practice being weaponized and abused by the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, and I can tell you I know that as a fact.
Well, thank you.
Well, we say that in almost every instance of weaponization, there's an ulterior motive going on, which is not to seek justice, but to have some other motivation. It could be political, it could be self-aggrandizement. Usually there's some kind of political effort to punish someone in a weaponized case, which you experienced and others have experienced. And it always involves a degree of prosecutorial overreach, where statutes are taken and stretched beyond belief, which happened to President Trump in the J6 case, and in all the cases he faced. Candidly, there's been no greater political victim of weaponization than Donald J. Trump. And that's the reality. If you can weaponize the system against a former president and a political candidate, you can weaponize it against any American citizen. And the Democrats are really damn good at it. And they've been getting away with it for a lot of reasons. Number one, they have the coverage of the media, and they have the coverage of the elites. So you have law professors standing behind Jack Smith, or standing behind others, Andrew Weissman when he was in government, and so forth. And that's a big problem. Second, you have, unfortunately, many judges around the country that are willing to give the Democrats this kind of leeway to engage in weaponization. And that's a serious problem. And then finally, historically and institutionally, in the Department of Justice, you did not have any kind of control over individuals, over prosecutors that were engaging in weaponization. When Jack Smith went after President Trump, no one in the Department of Justice stood up and said, that's wrong. No one, not one person, from the Attorney General down. That Department of Justice wanted to put President Trump on trial in 90 days from the time he was indicted. 14 million documents and 500 witnesses. And they wanted to put President Trump. It takes longer to get a traffic ticket adjudicated in D.C. than when they wanted to put President Trump on trial in a show trial. That's the system that we're dealing with, and it should terrify all of us, because it currently could happen again.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Dennis is living proof of it. So is Jeff and other folks that we're talking to today. You mentioned overcharging, some of these tools, Jeff, John, both overcharging, pretrial detention, gag orders, which we saw used against the president many times. How does that keep the defendants from adequately defending themselves? How do those tactics work?
Well, interestingly enough, Jack Smith is a product of the Eastern District of New York, and so enough said. But he tried to get a gag order, and it was successful. It was limited later on by the district court, appellate court. But the objective always is to crush the defendant. And that's been going on way too long, not only financially, not only emotionally, but also by not giving them the opportunity to speak to the public. Jack Smith wanted, and again, coming out of the Eastern District of New York, wanted a gag order in the middle of a presidential campaign.
What?
So it inhibits the ability of counsel to get their message out. The other thing that these prosecutors do is they insist on an order where you can't share information with other defense lawyers. So it literally blocks your ability to collaborate and share information. And in the Trump case, for example, they limited my ability to share information with President Trump. I had to do it one-on-one.
Unbelievable.
To the point of
I was going to ask you.
To the point of crushing a defendant, the day I was indicted, my wife and I had to listen to the prosecutor tell the judge that I was so dangerous that I shouldn't be around my 6-month-old son. My wife was devastated. Thankfully, she did not win that argument. However, she did win the argument that I was so dangerous and had so much power in the town of East Haven that I should not live in my home in East Haven. My wife and I had to pack up, myself and my wife and my 6-month-old son, and live on a mattress for 4 months until the judge finally said the evidence no longer supported the facts that the prosecutor had said. She was trying to crush us.
Dennis, did that limit your ability to defend yourself in the courtroom itself, you and your attorneys? How did that process play out?
So I wasn't allowed into the town of East Haven for the first 4 months. It didn't really limit my discovery. The town of East Haven was very supportive of the police department. They knew what was happening in town. They knew that the police department was there protecting them. The town of East Haven actually, largely on the issue of illegal immigration, 3 times, all 3 elections went for Donald Trump. We are next to the sanctuary city of New Haven, and they had a huge population of illegal immigrants, and they were causing a lot of problems for our hardworking citizens in our town, including victimizing them, crime increase, hit and run accidents. There was an estimate that 22% of all accidents were hit and run because of the amount of illegal immigrants in our town. There was one illegal immigrant who hit a 14-year-old boy, went through the windshield of the car. We arrested him, put a high bond on him. The next day, he was released on a lowered bond, and he fled to Ecuador and never faced justice for hitting that 14-year-old boy.
Wow.
Okay, so three quick things. First of all, to agree with John that there's never been anyone in U.S. history who's been the subject of weaponized attempts to pervert the justice system more than Donald Trump. From the documents case down in Florida to the Jack Smith J6 case, even though it really wasn't about J6, it was an attempt to criminalize having a different view of the election and create a phony conspiracy arising out of that, to the Alvin Bragg case up in New York that I attended and covered for Real America's Voice a day of the trial of, to the Georgia case with Fonnie Willis, which was another complete travesty that's, thankfully been thrown out at this point. It's off the charts how they went after President Trump, and it's a miracle at some level, but it's due to great lawyering by people like John Loring that President Trump avoided those negative consequences. But I also believe that the hand of God was looking out for President Trump. When I was up there at the trial, this shows how statutes get perverted. In reality, that case really, should have been tossed out from the start. And the only way they could try to turn it into a felony was they had to say that misdescribing legal billing was a felony because it was tied to another violation of law, which they said was federal election law. I was there in the courtroom that day when the Matthew Colangelo, who's an interesting figure, probably a familiar name to some of you who follow weaponization, who was the acting associate attorney general, the number 3 spot in DOJ under President Biden. He leaves that lofty spot to go and be a line attorney working for Alvin Bragg for the chance to prosecute Donald Trump. So you have to scratch your head at that. But I saw the day where he argued against Emil Bovee, who was the number 2 to the number 2 in Trump 47 at DOJ, and now is on the Third Circuit. They were arguing about this election law issue, and literally they would really not allow the opinion to be expressed that there was no violation of election law in terms of what had been done in characterizing a payment that had been made to this woman, Stormy Daniels. But, to hear Matthew Colangelo, it was terrible. He had completely ridiculous constructions of the federal election law statute. And the judge, the New York local judge, had no qualifications whatsoever to be assessing election law, which can be extremely complex. And let me use that to go into a structural point about the Justice Department. So the litigating divisions, there are 7 of them at the Justice Department, and I happened for a time in Trump 45 to have run 2 of them at the same time. They interface with the U.S. Attorney's offices, which there are 90 plus offices around the country, at the Deputy Attorney General, right? So the U.S. attorneys, I think they're under supervised. And if you want to call them in and kind of fight with them, you have to get a meeting with the Deputy Attorney General oftentimes, and then the Deputy Attorney General has to agree with, someone like me, an Assistant Attorney General who was running a litigating division. So without giving details about the case, I'll tell you, case involved an incredibly complicated statute called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA. And that statute is just off the charts complicated. Call it a 10 on a 10-point scale. And the regulations underneath of it are even more complicated. Call them an 11, like this is spinal tap, right? It goes past, the dial goes past 10. So I made all the arguments about why they were overcharging, that they were dealing with a case that was a misdemeanor and not a felony. And I, went through the statute, I went through the regulations, I went through the related constitutional arguments. And the people from the U.S. Attorney's Office who wanted to go forward, they had no response to any of the legal substance. Their response literally was, but we know our local jury pool. We can convict this company. We know we can get the felony. And, to my response to that is not what the Justice Department is for. In the entry room to the Attorney General's office at Main Justice, there's a wooden circular anteroom. I call it like the couple. If you look around above height level, there's carved in wood. There's this saying that the United States wins its point in court when justice is done its citizens. So I repeated that to them. I told them that is what we are here for. You're not here to just nail people to the wall. But sadly, the approach in too many attorneys' offices by the assistant U.S. attorneys is not to take that saying to heart, but just to do, if they decide someone's a bad guy, and that's often politically tinged, and certainly as to President Trump, mega politically tinged, that's all they need to have.
Yeah, and every one of these cases is politically tinged in some way or another, I think. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me for this panel. And ladies and gentlemen, please stay with us. We're going to continue. And one of the big questions that needs to be answered is, where is the line between a legitimate federal prosecution and then where does it cross over to weaponization? That's one of the things that I think that our organization and the organizations that you represent and the work you're doing is going to continue to help the American citizen be able to identify that and seek redress and the opportunities to make repairs on our legal system, which are critically important. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Rob Blagojevich. I used to be the governor of Illinois, the 40th governor of Illinois, and inmate number 408922424. Needless to say, it was way better being governor. Food's a lot better. You never have to wait in line, and you get to sleep in your own bed. Plus, I didn't do it. And I'm here to talk about weaponization, lawfare, the misuse and abuse of power by uncontrolled prosecutors with unlimited resources who make names for themselves to put innocent people in prison, criminalize things that aren't crimes, who will get you at all costs because it's all about winning and not about justice. I'm delighted to be here with a good group of people who are active on this issue because this is an issue that's central to the freedom that we in America have been promised and that all too often, too many of us, including me, have taken for granted. But I've learned the hard way that the gift of freedom is fragile. And it's fragile when you have people who have power, who abuse that power, who manipulate, abuse the law, and turn it into a weapon to get other people who haven't done anything wrong. And they can criminalize anything. That's the hard lesson I learned from my long, hard experience. I had the misfortune of being inmate number 408922424 for a total of 2,896 days. That's 1 month short of 8 years. Assuming good behavior, I would have ended up doing 12 and a half years, but for the fact that President Trump reached in to rescue me back on the 18th of February 2020 and commuted my sentence. Years would go by, and 5 days into his second term, I received a phone call from President Trump on a Saturday night when he called me to tell me that he was going to give me a full and complete pardon. Let me use this opportunity to thank President Trump again, express my profound gratitude for his kindness to me and to my family. The best gift my two young daughters have ever received was the gift that President Trump gave them when he brought their father home. But let me also say to anybody out there who cares about the law and the truth and about freedom, not only did I not do it, but I would never give in to those corrupt prosecutors who wanted me to say a few things. And if I did, they'd go easy on me. They were even dangling 18 months after they had failed to convict me at a first trial, then tried me a second time, used unlawful standards, actually used standards the United States Supreme Court said were not the law, was not the law, to win convictions for legal conversations, things that weren't crimes. So I had a lot of time in prison to collect my thoughts and think about, what I would do if I was ever given a chance to know freedom again. My life has been a story where it's been, well, I think rather eventful. I was once on top of a very high mountain and then buried in a valley deep and dark. So I've seen life from both sides. And I know that I've been the beneficiary of a lot of opportunity in this great country. I have lived the American dream, but I've also had the bad experience of living a Kafkaesque nightmare. And I'm not alone. I'm in a room with people who've experienced the same thing, and there are dozens, hundreds of people who are experiencing that today. It is absolutely essential for those of us who care about freedom in America that we preserve the rule of law. Now, one of the things you get to do in prison, and I'm not recommending it for anybody who didn't break a law, but one of the things that you can do is you can catch up on your reading. And I actually had a chance to do a lot of reading because I was there for as long as I was. And believe it or not, I actually read Shakespeare. I didn't do it in school like I should have when they assigned that to me. I went to public school in Chicago. I wasn't exactly setting the world on fire there. But in prison, with all that time, I picked up books I should have read years before. And I read several Shakespearean plays, and one was Henry IV, Henry VI, Part 1 and 2. And there's a famous line in Henry VI. The line is, the first thing we do is let's kill all the lawyers. And people who don't like lawyers, and it's understandable, have embraced that line to use it as sort of a criticism of lawyers. But the intent of what Shakespeare wrote was, if you want to take away the freedom from the people, the first thing you do is kill all the lawyers, because the lawyers are the guardians of the rule of law. And the rule of law must be sacrosanct if we're going to have freedom in America and preserve the freedom that we believe we have and that all too often now some of us have not had. Preserving and protecting the rule of law and making that sacred. And so it's a real pleasure for me to be involved with Cynthia Hughes, who's really heroic in her efforts to organize people at the grassroots level to take back our government by fighting to protect people who've been wrongfully accused of crimes they haven't committed, and preserving and protecting the rule of law. I've learned from my own political experience, and in that I've had some success. I had the misfortune of winning that second race for governor, and even the first one. I often wish I didn't win that second one. But I know what it's like to win elections, and I know how you can change things that start at the grassroots level. And organizers like Cynthia Hughes and her organization, Weaponizationwatch.com, are mobilizing people around our country to be active and involved with great Americans like Ed Martin, the pardon attorney, who's working out in the Department of Justice to actually do something about the abuse of power from those who sometimes will abuse their power within the Department of Justice. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here. There's so much work to be done. In the final analysis, all of us have a responsibility, I think, to please the Lord. And what would that be? What is it that he requires from us? It is to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God.
Hello again. I'm retired Colonel Rob Maness from Weaponization Watch, and we're back with another panel, and this panel is about the weaponization of government itself. And with me on this panel are former Governor Rod Blagojevich from Illinois, Jeremy Hutchison of Unify.com or .us, John Lauro, attorney for President Trump in his January 6th case, and Jeff Clark, the new Vice President of Litigation for Oversight Project. We're here to talk about this. And Governor, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. You know, your case became one of the most well-known federal prosecutions, but in hindsight, what are the lessons that it teaches us about the overreach and abuse of power?
That's a good question, Colonel. I think maybe the best lesson I probably learned from that whole experience was, don't just assume that those people, the FBI agents and the prosecutors, the federal prosecutors, are the good guys. I made the mistake to think that they were. I made the mistake to think that they were interested in justice. I thought that you can honestly work with them in good faith. And the case of being a governor with something like 53,000 employees, if somebody did something wrong, you want to make sure you get it right, that you can work with them and actually correct the mistakes or even root out those that are doing things wrong. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that it was all about trying to get the guy at the top so they could make names for themselves and become big fancy lawyers with $1 million salaries as partners. So I think the mistake I made was thinking that you can work with them in a good faith way and that they would act in good faith. And it's unfortunate. I don't want to malign FBI agents or prosecutors because I'm a former prosecutor myself at the state level. I still believe that most of them are good people who are committed to do right and to do justice. But all too often now we found, I think in recent history, that many of them are using their positions of power as platforms to go on to career advancement. And I think one case in point that I'd like to point out is a really sort of like a highlight case is the Arthur Anderson case. And you've got this lawyer named Weinstein, I think his name is, on CNN. And did I get his name right? Weissman. Andrew Weissman, who prosecuted the Arthur Anderson case on obstruction of justice and other issues. And the United States Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that the standard that was used to convict the people at Arthur Anderson was unlawful, that they didn't break a law. And as a result, that company went out of business and thousands of people lost their jobs. And Andrew Weissman gets a promotion, and gets on television and becomes a legal analyst for a network like CNN. And that shouldn't be. And I think there has to be some sort of accountability for some of these people who abuse their power. And so I would simply say that through my long and hard and unhappy experience, I think the best thing we can do as citizens is to recognize a fundamental principle of human nature, and that is power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Our founding fathers understood this, created a system dividing power. What they didn't foresee was a cancer within the executive branch of these uncontrolled prosecutors using that power to gain advancement and using it to terrorize others who are the ones who make the rules, but don't dare to try to do anything to reform it, lest those same people focus their guns and their attention on them. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm so glad to be here with you, Colonel, and with this panel, and with Cynthia and all the rest, because as citizens, history teaches me, we can make a big difference and change things.
Yeah, thank you, sir. You had mentioned previously that you had read Shakespeare, and there's a line in one
I wasn't lying.
that he mentioned about lawyers.
Yes, sir.
Kill all the lawyers first, but what he really meant was the attorneys are the guardians of the law, of the rule of law. And one of the things that I'm most concerned about and why I'm at this table today, a part of this organization, I'm very proud to be, thanks to Cynthia Hughes, is because I'm very concerned that the crown jewel of the United States itself, our legal system, is in jeopardy because we haven't figured out how to hold people accountable appropriately, like Mr. Weissman and others who have done things like that, and the folks that did that to you. Well, we're also joined by Jeremy Hutchison of Unify.us. And Jeremy, you're another person that has had the government weaponized against them. Talk to us about your school.
Well, I was a state senator in Arkansas, part-time gig. And so I was a lawyer as well, chairman of Judiciary Committee. And I won't go into the granular detail, but my uncle was a governor at the time, and they targeted me. It was the Supreme Court came back a year later after I'd served a year in prison and upended Section 666 bribery. And I think if I had gotten a 2255 hearing, I would have been exonerated, but mercifully I didn't have to wait for that because President Trump was gracious enough to offer me a pardon. But what I learned, to follow up on what the governor said, and I agree with all that, but I've started thinking about our system and the weaponization in terms of Iran, which is what we're experiencing right now. And we can criticize President Obama or President Biden for allowing Iran to weaponize itself. But we've learned that if human beings, whether they be religious zealots like are in Iran or whether they be prosecutors, if they have the weapons, human nature is that they will use it. So what I think we ought to do is de-weaponize what the Justice Department has. The weapons that they have a trial penalty. They have untold amounts of money. They have 350,000 federal criminal violations that they can pick and choose from, and then an infinite number of ways to interpret those statutes to really get anybody they want to get. There's a lot of other mens rea. That was a quaint notion we learned about in law school, but is not practiced, and we need to restore mens rea to every single statute. So there's these weapons that we as citizens have allowed our Congress to delegate to the Justice Department. And anytime, whether it be Iranians or whether it be the United States Department of Justice, if human nature is, if they have weapons, they'll be used. And so I'm hopeful that we can, through this organization, and Unify and others, we can de-weaponize the Department of Justice by bringing meaningful reforms, and those scales are rebalanced in the form of benefiting the American citizens.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming, and thank you for helping with this organization, and thank you for establishing Unified. John, look, I want to believe, and I think every American wants to believe, as the governor alluded to with lawyers, that the lawyers are the guardians of the rule of law, and in the United States, that is the pillar and the foundation that holds us up as a free nation. We want to believe that. Are we just seeing like a proliferation of bad actors, a few bad actors that get all the media attention? Or is this a systemic problem in federal law enforcement and federal Department of Justice operation?
I think it's systemic. I think it's been around for a long time. To quote Dante, I think in front of every federal courthouse, there should be a saying, "Abandon all hope, all ye who enter here," because that's what happens. The federal system is geared not to justice, but getting a conviction. That's the reality of it.
Sure.
And in terms of the responsibility of lawyers, prosecutors have a particular responsibility to do justice, not just seek convictions here, but to do justice. You know, Jack Smith, who went after President Trump, also tried the Robert McDonnell case, governor of Virginia.
Right.
He got a conviction. It went to the Supreme Court. He lost 8-0. It would have been 9-0, but Justice Scalia passed away. And the process is the punishment in these cases. The prosecutors who bring these cases not only try to get a scalp, let's face it, but the process itself harms people. I think we have to look at three things. Number one, there should be a permanent Office of Weaponization in the Department of Justice, fully staffed with aggressive leadership that looks at these issues every single day that the department prosecutes cases around the country. Second, we have to institutionalize these corrective measures that you've talked about. You saw the abuses firsthand, the lack of discovery, the lack of turning over exonerative material, the complete separation of resources. What you have as defendant compared to what the government can bring is just incredibly unfair. And then finally, we have to recognize that heaven forbid there's another administration on the Democratic side, weaponization is going to be on steroids, in my judgment. It's going to get so much worse, and we better get ready for it. I don't mean to criticize Democrats, but the reality is that's what's going to happen.
I think you're absolutely right, and they say it every day. You hear political leaders that are in elected office, like Hakeem Jeffries, say that exact thing. So you're exactly right. Well, you know, I've been on the panel now surrounded by attorneys, and military officers and attorneys have one thing in common. We talk in threes. I've noticed that. And my friend Jeff Clark is with us today. Jeff, you have a challenge because Shakespeare and Dante have both been invoked here. So who's the third one that you're going to invoke in your response to my question? What mechanisms exist today that can hold prosecutors at the agencies that are weaponized accountable? And I hate to ask it this way, but are they even working at all?
Well, I could rise to that challenge, but I think I'm going to re-invoke Shakespeare at the appropriate point in my quick remarks here. So first of all, let me just say that I've received a pardon from President Trump. I'm very grateful to him. He called me on the evening of November 7th of last year to tell me about that. And we reminisced a little bit about discussions from the 2020 election, which I thought had been perverted in various ways. And look, I'm uber conservative. So much so that my college folks at Harvard made baseball cards of the students, and they put me in an American flag cape. Okay. So if someone had told me in 1989 when I graduated from college that eventually, fast forward, I'm going to be on a panel with Governor Blagojevich, and we're going to be agreeing with each other, I would have said, no way, that's never going to happen. And if you told me you're going to get a pardon for accused federal crimes, I would have said that's never going to be necessary. That's even crazier than the Blagojevich hypothetical, right? But here I am. Life creates strange things. Look, I'm pleased to be on a panel with, I think of Governor Blagojevich as a Main Street Democrat. My dad was a Democrat. I think that it's people like Barack Obama and then the people who actually ran the Biden presidency by autopen who are the Marxists. And that's a big shift. And that's one reason why we get this. We get this attitude of killing all the lawyers in order to take the protection from people. And for people who don't know, one reason why lawyers use this term esquire, sometimes you'll see that on their stationery, is because originally in England, the system that our law grows out of, there was trial by combat. And so you would have Knight X, you would designate him, he would go and have a fight on your behalf. Eventually, it got turned into a more civilized system where there was no bloodshed. There was just an exchange of legal papers, of filings of briefs, of filing writs and the like. But the tradition of calling lawyers who were engaged in that kind of proxy combat esquire continued. So it is the lawyers who do that for people. If people don't have that, then they are completely defenseless. And so that's why we now have an organized Marxist effort to strip people of the lawyers who can fight for them. And that term has been called lawfare or barfare. Barfare, I think, is a particularly virulent form of lawfare, which is just to weaponize things like legal ethics rules in order to take out your legal opponents. And that was turned on me. At my bar trial, this should hopefully get a chuckle from the audience. The bar prosecutor stood up and he said that I was the single gravest threat to the Republic since the Confederacy. You can't even imagine what that kind of feeling it engenders in you. So look, these things are out of control, Rob. Yeah. We talked about that on the prior panel. Look, one way we have to recover this is people have to become more accountable to something outside themselves. And that to me is God. Our Constitution has an oath clause in it in which you take an oath to uphold the Constitution. I don't think that oath means anything for a lot of people, and it especially doesn't mean anything for people who are Marxists who don't believe in God. But if you believe in God, you know in your heart and in your core that the law is being perverted.
Absolutely. And gentlemen, thank you very much. And I agree. I totally agree. The governor spoke about his belief in God earlier, and that is the one place you can go that is outside of yourself. And we all need to practice that. I also want to take the opportunity before we close here to thank Cynthia Hughes for setting up weaponizationwatch.com. And folks, we need your support. If you could go give a donation there, that'd be great. But I also want to personally thank President Trump, because President Trump's, by pardoning people like Jeff Clark and others and Governor Blagojevich, is resetting the table and establishing mechanisms like this organization that are on the outside of government, but also incentivizing people in government to reset the table and respect the rule of law once again and hold people accountable. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to Weaponization Watch. My name is Marcus Ratnathicum. I'm very happy to be here and to moderate this short panel here. To my left is the esteemed lawyer, John Morrow. John has represented a lot of clients in his career, including a very high-profile client of President Trump in the prior administration with the Jack Smith investigations. To his left is Walt Pavlo. Walt has been criminal justice impacted himself, spent time in prison, got out, just shared with me some of the unique aspects of the case, saying, "Look, I did it." But what's very interesting about Walt and what he's going to bring today is that he now helps people who are in prison get the resources and the rights and the kind of representation that they need within the BOP, so that they can, have productive lives, behind bars. So I guess first to say thank you again to Cynthia Hughes for having us here at the Weaponization Watch. This is, yes, that's right. Cynthia's back there. Weaponization Watch, I'll just do my short pitch of how highly I think of this organization, is the only organization that I'm aware of that works on clemency that is completely nonprofit. Weaponization Watch does not take clients. It scans applications for people in need of clemency who merit clemency. So you can't buy representation from Weaponization Watch. You can have your case highlighted by Weaponization Watch. 2, again, Weaponization Watch is the only organization I know of that is completely transparent about the cases it takes on. Weaponization Watch has very, very clear criteria for what it sees as weaponization when it comes to, FBI misconduct, either really novel or stretched theories of law, novel applications of statutes, these exotic statutes that we've never heard of, or really excessive sentencing. And so what Weaponization Watch has on its website is it lists the cases that it's representing, and it lists why it's representing those cases. And I think that this represents something sorely needed in the clemency space, which is a very righteous and tremendous executive power that is being used and should continue to be used. And what she's managed to do is do this in a profoundly transparent way, so that the American people can see, really what's happening with people who are targets of weaponization, and can really see what's happening in terms of the mechanics of weaponization. How does this work? As Walt and John are really aware of, it's not simply a prosecutor with a bone to pick. The apparatus of weaponization is far more sophisticated. It involves work within the FBI and the DOJ, along with the media, along with other agencies, in tandem. And so it's something far beyond, any one particular actor. So that's my pitch for Cynthia Hughes and for this really wonderful organization doing tremendous humanitarian work in this country. So that being said, welcome you guys, and thank you guys so much for being on this panel. And I guess I'll start with Walt. You speak to your clients are in prison. All your clients are in prison, and they're in prisons for all kinds of different crimes. And so you get to see a lot of cases. When you look at cases and you think about weaponization, what is weaponization to you from your vantage point?
Here's what I'm seeing is that there are people that don't understand why they're going to prison, which to me is disturbing. If you've done something wrong, like in my own case, I understood that I had done something wrong. I went away and learned my lesson, and I came back, and I get that, and that's what it's supposed to be. It's also supposed to keep dangerous people away from society. But what I see more and more of is people who are going to prison who just don't believe that they did anything wrong. There's another group that has pled guilty because they couldn't take the consequences, even though they believe that they're innocent, are taking a deal because I can do 20 years in prison or I can do 3. Now those are the threats. I don't know. John would know better how much they can really enforce. Nobody gets 20, but some people you can. And then there's the other group that says, you know what, I did some things wrong, but did I need to go to jail for this? I mean, I don't understand. Like, I'm a good dad. I'm a stand-up citizen. I pay my taxes. I mean, I got 99.9% of the things. And yes, I did do something wrong, but I'm not part of some vast conspiracy. I'm not an evil person. I didn't plan this going day and night. I had a regular life. And so those are sort of the groups that I fall in. Sadly, I will tell you, Marcus, is that the people who are most able to adapt to prison the easiest are the ones who've done something wrong. But the ones who haven't, which is starting to be a majority, are quite disturbed over what's happened to them.
It's like 2 layers of adaptation to both the prison, but also digesting being falsely accused.
Correct. And how do you defend yourself, particularly once you pled guilty? People are pleading guilty to crimes they didn't commit. That's known. There's been plenty of great stories. There's a great judge out of New York, Judge Rakoff, who has written extensively on this, who still sends people to prison, mind you, which I've never quite figured out. But there's a lot to that where I think that we've hit a point now where we're over the edge of prosecution to people and the harm that we're doing. It's like a profession. I'm sure we'll talk about that too, but it's a profession that harms people for the rest of their lives.
It's a crisis of overcriminalization of our country. There's something like 3,000 potential criminal statutes that are on the books. I've been practicing criminal law for nearly 40 years. I don't know all 3,000, but I do know that probably 80% of my clients have no idea that they violated a criminal right, or no idea that they consciously entered into some activity that could violate criminal law, and then suddenly they have to hire me. There's a story that prosecutors in New York, federal prosecutors, would sit around talking about how to prosecute Mother Teresa. Seriously, because after all, she's raising money based on faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, and prove that, okay? And as a result, they would come up with mail fraud theories and wire fraud theories. But that shows you where we're at. There was another book written a few years back, A Felony a Day. The reality is that most Americans commit 1 felony per day, and they don't even realize it. So that's what we're dealing with. And as a result, the concept of deterrence is out the window, because you don't know that you're violating a law, and yet one day you could find yourself on the other side of a criminal prosecution. And heaven forbid you are, because then the consequences are, A, it's going to cost a lot of money. B, if you get convicted in the federal system, you're basically going to jail for a long time. And then 3, as well, says there's a penalty for going to trial. A judge will treat you more harshly if you have the temerity to put the government to its proof.
Well, Galt said something. He said majority of what's becoming a majority of people who are in prison, I think he said maybe didn't even do anything. Mm-hmm. John, you've been on both sides, a prosecutor and now a defense attorney. What respond to that?
Well, first of all, the work Walt is doing is just amazingly helpful to people who experience incarceration, and it's devastating to people individually, to families, to relatives. It's a tremendous cost to society by we're putting all these people in jail. I don't know that there's an easy solution, because politically, it's much easier to say criminalize everything. Put those bastards in jail. That's the first reaction of society, and I think on both sides, and candidly, I think the more conservative people now are coming around to the belief that we are putting too many people in jail. Many conservatives have been targeted as victims of weaponization, but I think it's going to take a great political will to change that.
And you've talked about this blurring of the line of civil and criminal. Civil, what can be issues that can be or should rightfully be handled in a civil matter end up getting handled in a criminal matter. What can you kind of expound?
What I tell clients is every single civil case can be turned into a criminal case by a crafty prosecutor. Every single case, and it really. It's the malleability of our laws that allow that to happen. And candidly, prosecutors get, attaboys if they're able to do that. And they get promoted and they become, high-level supervisors in offices. And that has to change.
Well, so speaking of prosecutors, so this is one more. You told a story once how when you first signed on to represent President Trump, the first thing you did was you hired a lawyer. Why?
They were going to come after me.
Wow.
because they were going to engage in weaponization. I knew those prosecutors were looking at me as a target. There were people around the country that were going to file bar grievances against me that I had to be ready. So I understood what the consequences were of taking on that representation. But that's the world we live in right now, where, you know, if you represent a client that parts of the public or the government finds reprehensible, you yourself are a target.
Yeah.
Well, your clients, do you see a lot of that civil?
Well, I covered extensively Operation Perfect Hedge, which was out of New York, where, you know, a lot of the hedge fund managers were convicted or, you know, prosecuted on insider trading. And I've seen a lot of, you know, financial crimes that are civil. And to John's point, they'll go through years settling with the SEC, sign with the SEC. The next day, they're indicted. That to me, I don't, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm thinking like, I never read this term double jeopardy, but it is in a way like a double jeopardy. It's that, you know, they get a chance at the civil, which I believe does, you know, is a really a grave punishment for a lot of financial professionals. Maybe not get to practice anymore. They got to go do something else. So that is a big thing. To throw them in jail is just like you know, it's a death penalty in many ways, you know, and you know, right now in the news, we're talking about TSA agents missing a payment, you know, missing one of their paychecks. Imagine missing a paycheck for 2 or 3 years while you're draining your savings account, and no offense, John, to pay John. You know, I mean, it's an unbelievable burden that no one even expects. So I mean, I think that you know, those are like, you know, just some of the observations that I see as far as, you know, the heavy burden that there is, that these could be completed by civil, and then they turn criminal. And there's plenty, and that's not just financial crimes. There's a lot of different, you know, related, not just insider trading, I mean, but there's a lot of crimes that could just be handled civilly.
And what Walt is saying is that sort of the dark underbelly of prosecutions, which is many prosecutors look at these cases in terms of credential enhancement and as a pathway to becoming a partner at a big law firm. I mean, you can monetize bringing these types of cases and stretching the law and prosecuting people who don't know that they're violating the law and put that on your resume, and that leads to a big law firm partnership in many instances. So the reality is that there's an economic incentive to bring these cases. And you have some very bright people who graduate from top law schools. They go into a prosecutor's office, and their pathway to richness is by prosecuting people and having scalps on their belt. And no one really wants to talk about that, but that's the reality. And you've seen it in your experience, and I know you've seen it.
Well, you know, to that point, John, I covered also I write for Forbes, and I was doing Varsity Blues up, you know, and what was going on with these very wealthy parents sending their kids to these, you know, schools, and somebody asked me to comment about what's going on with these prosecutions. I happen to be in Boston, where I spend the summers, and I said, this isn't a prosecution. This is a job interview. I mean, this guy is going to go out there. He is practicing against the biggest law firms that are out there, the most prestigious law firms. And, you know, I'm not saying that he did, but, you know, if you give a guy a good deal, chances are you might have a partnership waiting for you. It raises a question that is like, I'm suspicious now. And our justice system should not be like that. It shouldn't all. One other point I wanted to make too, because we are talking about, you know, civil litigation that leads to criminal things. The other thing that we see is media leading to prosecutions. I mean, prosecutors read the news too, and they're just kind of wait. Let me see what this investigative report's going to, and then they can dive into it. So not only do you have, you know, civil litigation that goes on with prosecutors in the background, you have media stories that are going out there about people that, you know, maybe they've been investigated, but it's certainly not to the extent to throw somebody in jail, but prosecutors look at that. And those are how cases are brought as well.
And there's collusion between prosecutors, agents, the media, documentary makers.
No doubt about it.
And it's like this vicious cycle. So the prosecutors, the agents, they feed information to the news media. The news media takes that, they exacerbate it, but they get credit for it. Maybe they make a documentary. They make all this money.
It's a familiar story.
It sounds very familiar. You've lived it. It's called one taste. And then the prosecutors bask in the glory of this media frenzy. So it's a vicious cycle of collusion. Again, nobody wants to talk about it, but that's the reality of what happens in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I got thrown into the deep end of this. I never had much interaction with the justice system, and then the One Taste case. I was an employee of One Taste for 15 years, continue to be, and we watched particularly with Netflix finally. A group, the Oversight Project came out with this report called FedFlix, and they documented all of this collusion with Netflix and the federal government. And there was a section about our case where they published how even the one, an FBI agent actually appeared on film in the Netflix film, and two, the Netflix prosecutors, and I watched this firsthand, filed an appearance in the criminal case and they argued alongside federal prosecutors as to why a subpoena that would uncover that followed evidence that Netflix producers and the FBI were talking together should be quashed. And so you had literally media companies and prosecutors joining forces to suppress this evidence. And I was shocked. I was like, how is this still a reality that there's no accountability for this at all?
And on the other end, you have a defendant. As good attorneys like John say, you can't say anything. And then, so now they're...
Except if you represent President Trump. You cannot say anything.
Good luck with that one. Good luck with that one.
But even there are limitations. Judge imposed limitations on what he could say. But the reality is that oftentimes the news media is being fed information from prosecutors. Okay, the prosecutors themselves are not making a statement, but the narrative is out there in the public, and that affects juries, because the reality is that either they've heard about it, okay, or as soon as they're selected for jury duty, they're looking at social media. I know they say they don't, but please don't lie to me and gaslight me. I know they're doing it, okay? And what are they going to do? They're going to look at the documentary. They're going to look at the news reports. And these are all extrajudicial facts that seep into our justice system and corrupt our justice system. Because who's making money off of it? The prosecutor wants a future job. The news media people get all the hits. The documentary people love it because it's, it's their gateway to riches, and it's all being monetized. And who suffers but the clients who's sitting in jail going, I didn't even know I did anything wrong.
That's right. Yep.
Very true.
On the media, what would actually be a actual check and balance? What would be on the collusion with the DOJ and the media, since all that corruption happens pre-trial?
All right, I really, really have strong beliefs about this. Lawyers have to be unchained and unmuzzled. They have to be able to make public statements during the course of a trial or a case. Right now, lawyers are not permitted to do that. If I say something to the media during the course of a case, they'll try to take my bar license away. And that has to change, because I have to be able to respond to the media reports that are being fed by the prosecution and by the collusion between the news media and prosecutors.
But even that, I mean, how do you if once a jury's tainted, and so and you're not going to untaint it, I don't think.
No, it's impossible.
Right.
It's impossible.
So what is a real check and balance?
Well, ultimately, and judges won't do this, is to have one-on-one personal interviews with jurors during the course of the trial and after as to whether or not they've been tainted by social media. No judge will do that because all the judges say, oh, my jurors are not looking at social media. Please.
No, it's one of the biggest things that I think gets people convicted too are the allegations themselves, which sometimes don't even make it into the courtroom. But in the indictment, they can have all these long things about all the things that they've done. And the press runs with those as fact.
They're like press releases.
It's like a fact.
Indictments are like press
It's
releases.
in the biggest, output of information about a criminal case. Guys like John are muzzled. The DOJ is not. They're putting out these long press releases. Look at all this bad guy, bad woman, all these bad things, and then that makes it into the narrative, and that becomes as a consumer of information, that's a fact. That's the way that they look at it. They, oh yeah, I read where he did this and that. He drove a Lamborghini. Nobody drives a Lamborghini unless they're stealing.
And you're so right. And what happens is prejudicial information just flies into a federal courthouse. Much of it is wealth evidence. So if a client is wealthy, okay, and let's face it, wealthy people are hated in our culture now.
Mm-hmm.
You go to college and you're being told how awful wealthy people are. Prosecutors know that, and they use that. They use that to prejudice the jury pool.
All right. Well, I think that's our time. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Cynthia and Weaponization Watch, for having us.
Thank you, Marcus.
All right.
Hi, my name's Nicole, and I have the opportunity to share a story that I haven't in over 15 years. And I want to thank Cynthia and Weaponization Watch for allowing me the platform to be able to share some of these details of what the two of us have gone through. I did speak a little bit before, but 15 years ago, agents surrounded our home with guns and pulled my husband out, and I had a 6-month-old at the time, and in that moment my life completely turned upside down, and I needed to figure out a way to protect my family. My husband has been pulled through so much media and attention of being this villain when no one was really taken into account some of the things that the person that he is and the person that he is as a family man. And I think despite everything that has happened to us and him being taken away from us for over 3 years and me being left to care for a 6-month-old at the time and a 2-year-old at the time by myself, putting myself through school, getting myself advancing through a career so that I can take care of my family. I think it's important to know the aftermath. Because Dennis was a police officer, he was sent over 12 hours away from us, and that was a big burden. Can't imagine driving in a car with a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old for 12 hours, trying to entertain them. The amount of times that we had to stop, so a 12-hour drive was even longer at times. And we would go into the prison, and I still felt dehumanized when I walked into a prison. I was breastfeeding, and I had to bring in breast milk bottles, and every time I walked in, it was an issue. They didn't know what was in it. I had to get clearance. It was just constant battles, just trying to even get food in for my children, just so that we can have a bit of normalcy and seeing him. And we did that every single month for over 2.5 years at least. I changed my schedule. I would work from 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. and then leave at 11:30, get to Michigan, see him for 2 days, and then do the trek back to go back to work on Monday. But even while he was away, and these are some of the important points that I want to bring up, and many of these I have not said out loud, outside of that he did record children's books for our children, so that my baby at the time and my 2-year-old, because those are critical ages in life, knew his voice, knew his face, and didn't have a fear. My fear was that they wouldn't recognize him when we went into a prison, and they wouldn't know his face. So we did everything that we could to keep that normalcy with our children. I would take a picture of every single moment of my children's lives, whether it was the first day of school, whether it was whatever it was. And I would send every month a picture book. I think it was Shutterfly that I would do. And I would send him over 100 pictures every single month. So at least he saw the pictures of everything that was going on in our children's lives. The other thing that he did for me, and I'm going to get emotional just thinking about it, is he made sure that I was also taken care of. He left me surprises in every single picture frame around my house. And I get a letter once a month, and he would tell me that I can open up whatever number was in the picture frame, and every picture frame had a quote in it. I have every single one. Trying to help me get through the day, trying to get through everything that we were going through. And then if I was lucky, I want to say it was like 10 picture frames, something like that. 10 picture frames had gifts behind them. And if I was lucky enough, I would open up a picture frame and there would be I get to get a gift. So I would tell my mother-in-law would bring over gifts for me. So it was jewelry, it was just all these different things. And then also for every Christmas, he made sure that there was a gift for me under the Christmas tree for him, so that Christmases were hard enough. We spent Christmases around a 15-minute phone call where everyone had the opportunity to say, Merry Christmas or whatever the holiday was. So it's things like that when these decisions are made, they don't understand those memories. He can see a picture, but the fact that he missed my daughter's first steps or the first day of school or any of those first, those are memories that I can't recreate. So I just want everyone to have the opportunity to see that when these decisions are made and when these political agendas, in my opinion, was against my husband, the aftermath that it has on a family and what it does. And despite all of those challenges, we came home when that sentence came back. Even though I was in the postpartum period, one of the most critical times in a woman's life, we sat there and we figured it out. We figured out what we needed to do to keep our family together and what we needed to do to protect our children. And, I'm thankful to say that when he came home, we continued our family and we have 3 kids, and we don't miss one moment. And he was never able to, he never missed a moment of our youngest daughter's life. He actually was able to stay home with her and take her to school and do all of those and see all of those first. But it shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. And, I'm thankful for, after 15 years, being able to have this voice and for other, women out there who might be in my situation to know that it's hard. It's hard. And there are days when you want to give up, but you do it for your family and you do it for your children. And again, I'm just grateful for Cynthia mostly for allowing me to have this opportunity to have a voice, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank Cynthia Hughes of Weaponization Watch. It's really incredible what she's doing. When the federal government comes after you, it's a nightmare. And when a large corporation teams up with that government and brings 2 hammers down on you, it's almost impossible. My husband's a wonderful man. He basically is in prison now for doing exactly what he was hired to do. And we fought for so long, for almost 8 years now. We went through trial, we went through an appeal, we went to the Supreme Court, and it just felt like we got the door slammed in our face every time. No one would listen. At this point, I'm going to ask President Trump for a pardon for my husband, because this was a terrible overcriminalization of a civil suit that had previously been settled, and the matter should have been done. But it wasn't over for people who were acting in their own interests.
and my husband is really incredible. People all across Silicon Valley still seek him out for his advice because he's a visionary and he's an innovator, and he needs a pardon so he can keep contributing his talents. And he hasn't been able to do that. He's been sidelined, and it's been heartbreaking to watch a wonderful man being sidelined for so many years. And he really needs, his career was his lifeblood, and it's just been heartbreaking to watch. So I'm asking President Trump for a pardon so my husband can continue to contribute his talents to the technological industry. Thank you.
Thank you to Cynthia also. Our trip out here was more of a last minute, and I wanted to bring my kids just so that they, for one, could experience Washington, D.C. on a meeting so many people of influence. But it was also kind of selfish because I needed them with me. I'm sure as Reagan knows too, like the past year, I've had to be a single dad for them, but they've also been there for me. Our battle started many years ago, being targeted by the DOJ for basically following the guidance that we got on our vote. The prosecutor lied, did Brady violations, held information that would have made us not be a part of any kind of investigation. And if you would have asked me in 2019, does the government do stuff like that? I would, before I was wrapped up in this world, I would have probably been like a normal person and said, no, like they have to do everything with integrity, right? But seeing it firsthand, it's not that way. It's just the whole system of weaponizing people and targeting them is scary. My wife has been in a facility for the past year, and she's coming home with the help of a lot of influential people. But the battle's not over because I'm supposed to go in also. And that's just going to tear these two away from me. So the court system's failed. The DOJ system in Hawaii has failed. It needs to go basically to President Trump and help us to bring justice to families like us that have just been destroyed by weaponization. So I pray for you, President Trump, to see our story, to listen to some of the people that are talking about our story within your cabinet, and please just help end this nightmare for us. Thank you.